A magnate isolated in his luxury mansion watches his son sink into silence after losing his mother. Experts fail, protocols repeat, and the child remains mute, motionless, absent. Then, a cleaning lady notices what no one else did. The boy reacts to scents, paths, and music. With a simple, affectionate gesture, she begins the healing the doctors ignored and awakens the forgotten voice. Roderick Dawson had conquered New York City. At 42, the founder of Nexus Tech was the most recognizable face in Pine Valley, the tech hub that had transformed the metropolis into the American Silicon Valley. His fortune exceeded billions, his name graced business magazines, and his presence was sought after at every major event in the country. But on that June morning, as he observed the city through the immense glass panels of his triplex penthouse on Fifth Avenue, Roderick felt like the poorest man in the world. The 600-square-meter apartment, decorated with designer pieces and contemporary artworks, had become a prison of marble and glass. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional murmur of staff who kept everything in perfect order. Not even the constant noise of New York City's most famous avenue could penetrate the acoustic windows of the property. "Sir, Dr. Maurice has arrived for Julian's appointment," announced Denise, the housekeeper who had worked for the family for over a decade. Roderick nodded unenthusiastically. It was the third appointment of the week. Tuesday had been the speech therapist, Wednesday the occupational therapist, and now the neurologist. The clinical schedule he had arranged for his son consumed almost every day of the week. "I'll be there in a minute," he replied, adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. The businessman walked to his son's room, where Julian, 7 years old, sat on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the wall. The boy showed no reaction when his father entered. His eyes, once lively and curious, now seemed distant, as if observing an invisible point beyond the horizon. "Hi, son, Dr. Maurice is here to see you," Roderick said, gently touching the boy's shoulder. Julian did not respond. He hadn't spoken for 4 months, since the day Helen left. The fulminant stroke had taken his mother in a matter of hours, with no time for goodbyes or preparations. The day after the funeral, the boy simply stopped, talking, playing, moving spontaneously. It was as if something inside him had been switched off. Dr. Maurice Taylor was the most renowned neurologist in New York City, known for treating the city's elite. His office in the Upper East Side charged exorbitant prices for consultations, but Roderick didn't care. He would pay any amount to have his son back. "How is he today?" the doctor asked after the formal greetings. "The same," Roderick replied, his voice heavy with fatigue. "He doesn't speak, he doesn't play. We have to guide him to eat, to bathe. It's as if he's absent." The doctor examined Julian with clinical methodicalness. He tested reflexes, observed pupils, asked questions that went unanswered. The boy allowed himself to be manipulated like a lifeless puppet. "The tests I requested last week indicate no neurological abnormality," the doctor declared, putting his instruments back into his Italian leather briefcase. "As we've already discussed, there's no brain lesion, no visible organic cause for this state." Roderick ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration that had become frequent. "Then why doesn't he react? Why doesn't he speak? All the specialists say the same thing, but no one gives me a solution." Dr. Maurice adjusted his Italian-framed glasses and adopted the grave expression he reserved for decisive moments. "Mr. Dawson, I believe we've reached a point where we need to consider a prolonged stay at the Horizon Clinic. There your son will receive comprehensive care, with a multidisciplinary team working exclusively on his case. It's a controlled environment, ideal for—" "Hospitalize him?" Roderick interrupted, looking at his son with anguish. "He's just a child. He's already lost his mother, and now he'd have to be away from home too." "I understand your concern," the doctor maintained his professional and detached tone, "but the Horizon Clinic is the most advanced in North America. I've worked in partnership with them for years and can guarantee that the results are significant. Furthermore, Julian's condition isn't improving here. Sometimes a neutral environment, free from emotional triggers, is what we need to make progress." As they talked, they didn't notice the silent presence of a young woman standing at the bedroom door. It was Teresa Oliver, newly hired for the apartment's cleaning team. Dressed in the discreet uniform of the outsourced company, she observed the scene with respectful attention. Roderick finally noticed her presence and gestured, indicating she could enter. Teresa stepped forward, her eyes briefly meeting those of the boy sitting on the bed. "Excuse me, sir. I just came to ask if I can clean the other suites now," she said, in a soft voice that contrasted with the clinical tone dominating the conversation. "Of course, Teresa. You can continue your work," replied Denise, who had just entered the room to escort the doctor out. Teresa nodded and quietly withdrew, but not before noticing something that seemed to escape the other adults. When she spoke, Julian's eyes moved slightly in her direction, an almost imperceptible movement but real. In the living room, Dr. Morris handed Roderick a folder with information about the Horizon Clinic, including an authorization document for hospitalization. "Think it over carefully, but don't take too long. Each day that passes in this state can make recovery more difficult. We're talking about an initial period of 3 months, with weekly evaluations. It's a considerable investment, but money is not a problem," Roderick cut in, without looking at the exorbitant figures detailed in the estimate. "I just want my son back." After the doctor left, Roderick was left alone in the immense living room. On the coffee table next to the clinic documents, there was a picture frame with a photo of the 3 of them. Him, Helen, and Julian, smiling during a vacation in the Hamptons, just 6 months earlier. Helen, with her dark hair blowing in the wind and the luminous smile that charmed everyone. Julian clinging to his father's neck, his eyes sparkling with joy. That family no longer existed. All that remained was an exhausted man, a child trapped within himself, and a luxurious apartment that echoed the absence of those who had departed. In the service wing, Teresa was putting away cleaning products when Denise approached. "How's your first day going?" the housekeeper asked. "Quiet, it's a beautiful place," Teresa replied, closing the cabinet. "But sad." Denise sighed, looking around as if afraid of being overheard. "It was different before. Mrs. Helen lit up this place. She played the piano every morning, made sure to prepare breakfast for her son, even with all the staff available. After she left, well, you see how it is." Teresa nodded, absorbing the information. "So there was a piano somewhere in that house. And music, and the boy. Was he always like this?" "Julian?" Denise shook her head. He was a cheerful, talkative child, full of energy. After his mother's funeral, he just shut down, as if he went with her, you know. Only left his body here. "I understand," Teresa murmured, remembering the brief moment when the boy's eyes had moved in her direction. "And does that doctor come often?" "Dr. Maurice, every week, him and a dozen other specialists. Mr. Dawson doesn't spare expense when it comes to his son. But so far," Denise made a vague gesture with her hands, "nothing works. I think they're going to hospitalize the boy." "A shame." Teresa remained silent for a moment, processing everything she had heard. Something in that story touched her deeply, awakening memories of her own life. "Where is the piano?" she finally asked, in Mrs. Helen's room. "But it's been locked since she left. Mr. Dawson doesn't allow anyone in there, not even to clean." Teresa nodded, understanding the dimension of grief that permeated that place. It wasn't just a boy trapped within himself. It was an entire house frozen in time, preserving the pain as if trying to preserve the memory of the departed. "I need to finish cleaning the bathrooms," she said, picking up her supply cart. As she walked down the silent corridor, Teresa paused briefly in front of the room where Julian remained seated, in the same position. She observed him carefully and noticed something that had escaped all the specialists. The boy only stepped on the center of the marble floor tiles, carefully avoiding the lines between them. In the following weeks, Teresa Oliver closely observed the routine of that fragmented family. There was something in Julian's silence that deeply troubled her, not as a professional challenge but as a calling. During her cleaning work, she noticed patterns that the specialists in their brief clinical visits would never perceive. The boy didn't step on the floor lines. He always stopped at the kitchen threshold, hidden, when the staff prepared breakfast. His eyes, seemingly empty to the doctors, followed the movement of the curtains when the wind swayed them. And more revealing, his body visibly relaxed when a TV program played classical music in the background. Teresa came from Miami, where she had worked for years caring for children with special needs at a downtown charity. She had no diplomas or certifications that would impress the specialists who frequented the apartment, but she carried with her knowledge not learned in books, the ability to see beyond the obvious, to understand that every human being, especially children, has their own language. One Wednesday afternoon, while cleaning the corridor near Julian's room, Teresa heard the sound of a tense conversation coming from Roderick's office. "The medication isn't working. Dr. Maurice," Roderick's voice sounded exhausted. "We're already on the second dosage adjustment, and Julian is still absent." "Patience is needed, Mr. Dawson. These cases, patience." Frustration was evident. "It's been 5 months since my son said a word. He doesn't smile, he doesn't cry, he barely eats if we don't insist. We've consulted neurologists, psychiatrists, speech therapists. They all say the same thing: no organic cause. And the only solution they offer me is a hospitalization in a very expensive clinic with no guarantee of improvement. The Horizon Clinic has specific protocols for cases like Julian's, with 24-hour monitoring and how long will this hospitalization last? 3 months? 6? A year? What if he doesn't get better there either?" There was a heavy silence before the doctor's response. "Mr. Dawson, with all due respect, your son's condition is serious. This type of post-traumatic selective mutism can become chronic if not treated properly. With each passing day, the chances of full reversal decrease." Teresa continued her work, moving silently through the corridor, but her ears were attentive. There was something in the doctor's tone that bothered her, a cold, clinical certainty that left no room for other possibilities. In the late afternoon, when most of the staff had already left, Teresa found Denise in the kitchen, preparing tea. "Is that for Mr. Dawson?" she asked, indicating the tray with the porcelain cup. "Yes," the housekeeper sighed. "He's barely slept since Dr. Maurice started pressing for the hospitalization. I think he'll end up giving in out of desperation." Teresa hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Denise, did you know Mrs. Helen well?" The housekeeper's face softened into an expression of affection. 15 years working for this family. I saw Helen and Roderick meet, fall in love, marry. I helped prepare Julian's room before he was born. Helen was unspecial. She had an energy that was contagious to everyone, and she played the piano every morning. Oh, yes. Denise's eyes sparkled with the memory. It was her ritual with her son. They would wake up early. She would prepare hot chocolate for both of them and play while Julian was still in his pajamas. Then they would go together to choose the day's outfit. It was a sacred routine for them. Teresa absorbed every detail, assembling the puzzle of that family in her mind. And what music did she play? Denise closed her eyes for an instant, as if she could hear it again. Always the same melodies. A Chopin waltz that she said she played the day she met Roderick, and a lullaby that she composed herself for Julian when he was a baby. Sometimes other pieces, but these two were her favorites. "I see," Teresa murmured thoughtfully. "And her perfume. Do you remember what it was like?" The question seemed to surprise Denise, who frowned. "Perfume? Well, she always wore the same one ever since I met her. It was French with notes of vanilla and some flower. Jasmine, I think. Why?" "Caresti," Teresa replied with a small smile. "Thank you for sharing those memories with me." That night, upon returning to her small apartment in the Lower East Side district, Teresa couldn't get Julian out of her thoughts. Sitting at the kitchen table with an open notebook in front of her, she wrote down her observations of the day. Piano, Chopin waltz, lullaby, vanilla and jasmine perfume. Doesn't step on the lines. Stops at the kitchen threshold. Observes curtains. Teresa knew there was a pattern there, an internal logic that no one was seeing because they were too busy looking for symptoms and not for signs. The boy wasn't just absent. He was protecting himself, creating safe routes in a world that had become unpredictable and frightening. The next day, she arrived at work earlier. Denise greeted her with a tense expression. "Mr. Dawson spent the night awake. I think he's going to sign the hospitalization papers today." Teresa felt a tightening in her chest. She needed to act fast but carefully. As she cleaned the corridor leading to the bedrooms, she observed Julian sitting on his bed, as always, looking into space. At a moment when no one else was around, Teresa quietly entered the boy's room. She said nothing, just began cleaning the window glass with gentle, rhythmic movements. After a few minutes, she started humming a simple melody softly. For the first time, she noticed Julian's eyes following her with more attention. It wasn't a dramatic change, but it was there, a slight flicker of interest. Encouraged, Teresa continued humming as she worked. When she finished cleaning the windows, she moved a little closer to the bed. "This music is beautiful, isn't it?" she said in a low, gentle voice. "My grandmother used to sing it to me when I was little." Julian didn't respond, but his eyes remained fixed on her for a few seconds before returning to the invisible point he usually observed. In the days that followed, Teresa established a routine. Whenever possible, she would pass by Julian's room and hum while she worked. Sometimes she would tell stories in a low voice, as if talking to herself. She didn't expect answers. She didn't ask direct questions. She just created a constant and predictable presence. One Wednesday, while arranging the sofa cushions in the living room, Teresa overheard an argument in the office. The door was ajar, and Roderick's and Dr. Morris's voices reached her clearly. "The date for hospitalization is already set, Mr. Dawson. Next week, Monday. Everything is prepared." "I know, Doctor. I've already signed all the papers, made the initial deposit, but I confess I still have doubts. 3 months away from Julian. It's for his own good." The doctor's voice was firm, almost imperative. "And, if I may be frank, perhaps you also need this time to recover. Your dedication to your son is admirable, but you are clearly exhausted." Teresa continued her work, but her mind was racing. There was something in the doctor's insistence that didn't seem to be motivated solely by clinical concern. It was almost as if Julian's hospitalization was a personal matter for him. Later, she found Denise in the laundry room. "Is it true that Julian is going to be hospitalized on Monday?" she asked, helping to fold the sheets. The housekeeper nodded sadly. "Mr. Dawson is heartbroken, but he sees no other way out. Dr. Maurice guaranteed it's the only real chance for recovery." "And what kind of place is it?" "This Horizon Clinic? It's a very exclusive institution in the Upper East Side. It serves a maximum of 10 patients at a time, all from very wealthy families. Dr. Maurice is one of the clinical directors there. In fact, he founded the clinic along with some partners." This information set off an alarm in Teresa's mind. The doctor was referring the boy to his own clinic? "Denise, you know that locked room?" "Mrs. Helens?" "Yes, what about it?" "Does Mr. Dawson have the key?" "Of course. It's in the first drawer of his office desk, but no one has gone in there since, you know." Teresa nodded, an idea forming in her mind. "There's something I need to tell you, Denise. Something about Julian." The housekeeper looked at her with curiosity. "What is it?" "I've been observing him." "It's not that the boy doesn't react to anything," Teresa explained, lowering her voice. "He does react, but to specific things. Music, the sound of the wind in the curtains, the smell of breakfast. And he doesn't step on the lines on the floor. Did you notice that? As if he's following a safe map." Denise frowned, processing the information. "Now that you mention it, it's true. He always stops at the kitchen threshold in the morning, as if he's waiting for something. Or someone," Teresa added. "His mother, who used to be there preparing hot chocolate before playing the piano." Denise's eyes widened with understanding. "My God. Do you think—" "I think Julian isn't absent. He's trapped in an interrupted routine, waiting for something familiar to happen, so he can feel safe again." The housekeeper brought her hand to her mouth, emotional. "And what can we do?" Teresa took a deep breath before replying. "I need to get into that room, Denise. I need to see the piano, feel the atmosphere that was theirs. There's something there, I'm sure, something that can bring Julian back before they take him to that clinic." Denise seemed torn between the fear of disobeying her employer's orders and the hope. Teresa's words ignited. "Mr. Dawson leaves early. Tomorrow for an important meeting. He'll be out all morning," she finally said. "It's our only chance." Teresa nodded, grateful for the trust. "Thank you. I promise I'll do everything I can to help that boy." That night, Teresa spent hours researching selective mutism, childhood trauma, and nonverbal communication techniques. Although she had no academic training in the area, her years of experience with children at the charity had taught her that often the solution to complex problems lay in simple gestures, in offering security, predictability, and choice. The next morning, as soon as Roderick left for his meeting, Teresa and Denise met in the corridor leading to the locked room. The housekeeper held a small golden key, and her hands trembled slightly. "I'm afraid of what Mr. Dawson would say if he found out," Denise confessed, hesitating at the door. "I understand your apprehension," Teresa replied gently. But think of Julian. If there's any chance of preventing him from being hospitalized. The housekeeper nodded and with renewed determination inserted the key into the lock. The door opened with a slight creak, revealing a room that seemed frozen in time. Helen Dawson's room remained exactly as it was on the day she left. A king-size bed with impeccably made Egyptian cotton sheets, a book on the nightstand with a bookmark still on page 143, a pair of delicate slippers beside the bed, and near the window that opened onto a small balcony, a gleaming black Steinway grand piano. She played every morning, Denise murmured, emotional. It was the sound that woke up the whole house. Teresa approached the piano with reverence. On it was some carefully organized sheet music and a framed photograph. Helen sitting at the piano with Julian on her lap, both smiling at the camera as the boy tried to reach the keys. "Look at this," Teresa called, pointing to a small crystal bottle on the piano's surface. "Is this her perfume?" Denise approached and nodded. Yes, Helen always sprayed a little on her hands before playing. She said that way the music carried her scent. Teresa carefully uncorked the bottle and smelled the soft aroma of vanilla and jasmine. It was a delicate and enveloping fragrance, the kind of scent that stays in memory. "And these scores?" she asked, indicating the sheets on the piano. The one that's open was her favorite, the Chopin waltz I mentioned. The others must be her own compositions, including Julian's lullaby. Teresa examined the sheet music. She couldn't read music, but she could distinguish the handwritten title on one of them, Song for Julian. "Denise, do you think you could find a recording of that Chopin waltz?" "I think so." Helen had several classical music CDs in the office. "And as for the lullaby, any chance there's a recording?" The housekeeper thought for a moment. "Actually, yes." Helen recorded her compositions on her phone. The device is stored in the office drawer along with her other belongings. Teresa felt a wave of hope. "We need both of those items. And also," she hesitated, looking at the perfume bottle, "do you think Mr. Dawson would notice if we borrowed this for a few hours?" Denise looked apprehensive but nodded. "I don't think so. He never comes in here." "What are you planning to do?" "I want to create a moment for Julian," Teresa explained. "Something that reconnects with his memories of his mother, but in a gentle, non-invasive way. Music, aroma, predictability, elements that were part of their routine." As they talked, they heard footsteps in the hallway. The two women froze, fearing they had been discovered, but it was just Julian. The boy was standing in the open doorway, his eyes fixed on the piano. It was the first time since Helen's departure that the boy had moved on his own initiative to somewhere other than his room or the living room. "Julian?" Denise called softly. "Do you want to come in?" The boy didn't respond, but took a hesitant step into the room. Teresa and Denise exchanged hopeful glances, remaining still so as not to startle him. With slow, careful steps, Julian approached the piano. When he got close enough, he raised his hand and lightly touched the gleaming surface as if checking if it was real. "I think he misses this," Teresa whispered. "This place, this piano." They were part of his routine with his mother. At that moment, Denise's phone rang, breaking the spell of the moment. Julian started and quickly retreated, leaving the room almost running. "It's Mr. Dawson," Denise said, looking at the cell phone screen. "He's coming back early." The meeting ended sooner than expected. Teresa nodded, understanding the urgency. "Let's close everything up and continue later." "But you saw that, didn't you? He came here on his own. That means something." Quickly, the two tidied the room so it looked untouched. Before leaving, however, Teresa took the perfume bottle and one of the handwritten sheet music. "I'll return it before he notices," she promised. "And I need you to find that recording on Mrs. Helen's phone as soon as possible." During lunch, Roderick seemed more downcast than usual. Sitting at the dining table with Julian, he barely touched his food while his son remained equally inert in front of his plate. "Are you all right, sir?" Denise asked, serving more water. "Just tired," he replied, rubbing his eyes. "Julian's hospitalization is confirmed for Monday. Dr. Morris called a little while ago to confirm all the details." Teresa, who was entering the room at that moment with clean towels, felt her heart clench. She had only 3 days to try something before they took the boy. In the afternoon, while cleaning Julian's room, Teresa hummed the same simple melody as in previous days. The boy was sitting on the bed, as always, but his eyes seemed more attentive to her movements. "Did you know I also lost someone I loved very much?" Teresa commented, as she wiped the shelves. "My grandmother. She raised me from a young age, and when she passed away, I was very sad. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to leave my room." Julian didn't respond, but his eyes followed Teresa with more interest. "Do you know what helped me?" She continued, moving a little closer. "The good memories. The smell of the corn cake she made. The songs she sang. I realized that even when someone we love leaves, the love stays right here inside." She lightly touched her own chest. "And the happy memories too." For a brief instant, Teresa thought she saw a different sparkle in the boy's eyes. But he soon returned to his usual state of apparent disengagement. Later, when most of the staff had already left, Denise sought out Teresa in the laundry room. "I found it," she whispered, showing a smartphone. "Helen's phone with the music recordings. And I also managed to get a CD with the Chopin waltz." "Perfect." Teresa smiled, hopeful. "Tomorrow morning, before Mr. Dawson wakes up, we'll try something." The next day, even before sunrise, Teresa arrived at the apartment. Denise was waiting for her, nervous but determined. Together they set the scene. They turned on the stereo in the living room with the Chopin CD at a low volume. Denise prepared hot chocolate exactly as Helen used to. Teresa sprayed a little of the perfume on her hands and wrists and left the bottle on the coffee table. "Now we need to bring him here," Teresa said. "Without forcing, without pressure." "He usually wakes up early," Denise replied. "I'll check if he's awake yet." A few minutes later, the housekeeper returned with Julian, who allowed himself to be passively guided. As they entered the room, the Chopin waltz began to play softly. Teresa immediately noticed a subtle change in the boy. His eyes, previously vacant, quickly scanned the environment, as if looking for the source of the music. "Good morning, Julian," Teresa greeted in a gentle voice. "We've prepared hot chocolate. Would you like a cup?" As expected, there was no verbal response, but the boy took 2 steps towards the table where the steaming cups were. Teresa and Denise exchanged hopeful glances. "You can sit down if you like," Teresa invited, indicating the sofa. "The music is beautiful, isn't it?" Julian sat on the sofa, his eyes now fixed on the stereo. When the waltz ended, Teresa picked up Helen's phone. "There's another song I thought you might like to hear," she commented, as if it was something casual. "It's a very special song." She pressed play, and immediately the soft melody of the lullaby filled the room. It was a simple and moving composition, played on the piano by clearly skilled hands. The recording wasn't professional, probably captured by Helen's own phone during one of her sessions, but the beauty of the piece was undeniable. The effect on Julian was immediate and visible. His eyes widened slightly, and his breathing seemed to quicken. His small hands, previously inert in his lap, gripped the edge of the sofa firmly. "It's a beautiful song, isn't it?" Teresa commented, sitting at a respectful distance. "It seems to tell a story." As the music played, Teresa took a small bottle she had brought in her bag. It was Bubbles, a simple toy she had bought on her way to work. "Look at this," she said, blowing gently and creating a cascade of shimmering bubbles that danced in the air to the rhythm of the music. The bubbles floated gracefully across the room, reflecting the morning light in iridescent colors. One of them landed lightly on Julian's knee before bursting. That's when it happened. The boy looked up at Teresa, not with the vague gaze of recent months, but with a look of recognition, of presence. His lips moved slightly, not quite forming words, but it was the first voluntary movement of his face in a long time. Teresa continued blowing bubbles while the lullaby played on loop. The soft aroma of Helen's perfume lingered in the air, mixing with the smell of hot chocolate. It was a moment of sensory security, of recovered familiarity. With slow movements so as not to break the spell of the moment, Teresa offered the bubble bottle to Julian. "Want to try?" she asked softly. For several seconds, the boy didn't react. Then, to Denise's astonishment, who watched the scene with tears in her eyes, Julian reached out and took the bottle. He didn't blow the bubbles, he just held the object, examining it with renewed curiosity. "Very good," Teresa praised with a genuine smile. "That's right." At that moment, they heard footsteps in the hallway. Roderick appeared at the living room door, dressed in a bathrobe, his face marked by sleep and surprise. "What's going on here?" he asked, confused to see the unusual scene. His son holding a bottle of bubbles, music playing, cups of hot chocolate on the table. Before Teresa or Denise could answer, the cell phone on the table revealed its origin. Helen appeared on the screen as the playing file name. "This is—" Roderick's voice faltered, recognizing the music. "How did you—" "Sir, please don't be angry," Denise quickly said. "It was my idea. We thought that perhaps familiar sounds and smells could help Julian to—" Roderick raised his hand, interrupting the housekeeper's explanation. His gaze was fixed on his son, who continued to hold the bubble bottle while the lullaby played in the background. "How long has this been going on?" he asked, his voice controlled. "Just a few minutes, sir," Teresa replied, standing up respectfully. "I noticed Julian reacted to certain sensory stimuli related to his mother. I thought perhaps we could create an environment that was familiar and safe for him. His mother's music, the aroma of her perfume, hot chocolate as they used to make together." Roderick approached slowly and sat beside his son. Julian didn't react to his father's presence, but he also didn't recoil or lose focus on the bottle he was holding. He picked that up himself?" Roderick asked, indicating the toy in the boy's hands. "Yes, sir," Teresa confirmed. "It was his first voluntary movement in our presence." A mix of emotions crossed the businessman's face: hope, confusion, a pang of jealousy for not having been the one to elicit this reaction, and, most importantly, relief. "Why did no one think of this before?" he murmured, more to himself than to the women. "All these specialists, all these expensive tests. Sometimes we're so focused on finding problems that we forget to look at the person," Teresa replied gently. "Julian isn't sick, sir. He's grieving, and grief isn't a medical condition. It's an emotional journey. He needs security, predictability, and connection, not medication or hospitalization." Roderick looked at the employee with a mixture of surprise and respect. "You seem to understand a lot about this. I worked for years with vulnerable children in Miami," Teresa explained. "I learned that each person, especially each child, has their own way of processing loss and trauma. There's no magic formula or universal protocol." At that moment, the apartment doorbell rang. Denise hurried to answer and returned seconds later with a worried expression. "Sir, it's Dr. Morris. He said he came to discuss the final details before the hospitalization." Roderick's hopeful smile disappeared, replaced by a tense expression. "Let him in," he replied. After a moment of hesitation, Teresa started to get up, assuming she should withdraw, but Roderick gestured for her to stay. "Please stay. I want the doctor to see this." Dr. Maurice Taylor entered the room with his usual professional demeanor, wearing an impeccable suit and carrying his inseparable leather briefcase. He stopped abruptly upon encountering the scene, music playing, the smell of feminine perfume in the air, Julian holding a toy, and Roderick sitting beside his son with a defiant expression. "What is going on here?" Dr. Maurice asked, his gaze sweeping the room with evident disapproval. "Good morning, Doctor," Roderick greeted without getting up. "We're having a small breakthrough with Julian this morning." The doctor approached, analyzing the situation with a clinical eye. His eyes lingered on the cell phone on the table, where Helen's song was still playing, and on the perfume bottle next to it. "I see," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Am I to assume this was an unauthorized initiative?" The question, laden with veiled criticism, was directed at Teresa, who met the doctor's gaze without hesitation. "The idea was mine, Doctor. I noticed Julian reacted positively to certain sensory stimuli related to his mother. And do you have training in child neurology? Or perhaps in psychiatry?" The ironic tone was evident. "No, sir," Teresa replied with dignity. "I have practical experience with children in vulnerable and traumatic situations, and I know how to recognize when someone is responding positively to a safe environment." Dr. Maurice ignored the answer and turned to Roderick. "Mr. Dawson, I understand your eagerness to find quick solutions, but I must warn you about the risks of amateur interventions. Subjecting Julian to intense emotional stimuli without proper supervision can worsen his condition and—" "He picked up the bottle," Roderick interrupted, pointing to his son's hands. "By himself. Julian hasn't picked up anything on his own initiative in months." The doctor briefly examined the boy, who remained absorbed in the bubble bottle, seemingly oblivious to the adult's discussion. A coincidence, the specialist declared firmly. An involuntary reflex stimulated by the colorful object. It doesn't necessarily represent a significant cognitive or emotional breakthrough. Teresa felt a wave of indignation, but maintained her composure. She noticed, however, that Roderick did not seem convinced by the doctor's explanation. "Doctor, with all due respect," the businessman said, "why is it so difficult to admit that something so simple can work when all your sophisticated methods have failed for months?" Dr. Maurice's expression hardened. "Mr. Dawson, I understand your frustration, but I must remind you that we are dealing with a complex case. Isolated behaviors like this do not indicate real recovery. At the Horizon Clinic, we have scientifically validated protocols for—" "Protocols," Roderick repeated with a hint of bitterness. "We always come back to your protocols. Meanwhile, a cleaning lady achieved more progress in one morning than all your specialists in months." The doctor's face flushed slightly, but his voice remained controlled. "Precisely why we need a controlled environment. Random interventions can create a false sense of improvement and delay proper treatment." He turned to Teresa with professional coldness. "You, with all due respect, are not qualified to intervene in a case of this complexity. And, if I may observe, you are significantly exceeding your duties as a cleaning employee." Before Teresa could respond, something unexpected happened. Julian let the bubble bottle fall to the floor, making a small noise. All eyes turned to the boy, who was now staring fixedly at the doctor. There was no expression on his face, but his eyes were perfectly focused, no longer vague or distant. "Look at that," Dr. Maurice commented condescendingly. He dropped the object. "As I said, just an involuntary reflex, without conscious intention. This merely confirms my assessment that—" "He didn't drop it," Teresa interrupted softly. "He let go." "There's a difference." The doctor glared at her impatiently. "That's semantics without clinical relevance. The fact remains, Julian needs professional intervention in a controlled environment. This improvised sensory play may seem harmless, but it's creating unrealistic expectations and potentially harming the therapeutic process." Roderick seemed torn, looking from the doctor to Teresa, and then to his son, who had become motionless again, looking at the fallen bottle. "Julian will go to the clinic on Monday, as planned," Dr. Maurice declared in a conclusive tone. "I've prepared all the necessary documents, and the team is already assembled to receive him. 3 months of intensive treatment, with weekly visits from you, obviously." A heavy silence fell over the room. Teresa could see that Roderick was in internal conflict, torn between the authority of the renowned specialist and the small spark of hope he had seen in his son's eyes that morning. "What if—" Roderick hesitated. "What if we postpone the hospitalization for a week, to see if this new method brings any more progress?" Dr. Maurice shook his head categorical, strongly contraindicated. "Every day that passes in this state reduces the chances of complete recovery. Furthermore, the spot at the clinic is reserved, with a dedicated team already hired. A postponement would represent significant additional costs, and—" "Money is not a problem," Roderick cut in. "It's not just about financial costs, but about therapeutic opportunity," the doctor retorted. "Moreover, I must formally warn you about the legal risks of allowing unqualified interventions. As his physician, I'm obliged to formally register my objection to any delay in the recommended treatment." The mention of legal risks had the desired effect. Roderick visibly paled. As CEO of a publicly traded tech company, any personal scandal could have devastating repercussions for his business. "I understand," he murmured, defeated. "Monday, then." Teresa felt her heart clench, but knew she was not in a position to openly challenge the decision. Dr. Maurice gave her a briefly triumphant look before returning to his professional posture. "Wise, Mr. Dawson. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to briefly examine Julian before I leave, and I suggest," he looked significantly at Teresa, "that we do so in a more appropriate environment, without interference." Roderick nodded mechanically. "Denise, please take Julian to his room. Teresa, you can continue your work in another part of the apartment." The housekeeper gently took the boy's hand, who stood up without resistance. Before leaving the room, however, Julian briefly looked at Teresa, a look that seemed to contain a silent plea. While performing her usual tasks in the service area, Teresa fought against the feeling of defeat. She had achieved a small miracle that morning, a real connection with Julian, but the system, personified by Dr. Maurice, had quickly closed ranks to protect its protocols and authority. Hours later, when the doctor had already left, Denise sought out Teresa in the laundry room. Dr. Maurice and Mr. Dawson had a long conversation in the office, she informed in a low voice. The doctor insisted that all unauthorized interventions should cease immediately, and she hesitated. And what? Teresa pressed, feeling something worse was coming. He suggested that your presence might be disrupting Julian's established routine. He recommended that you no longer have direct contact with the boy until his hospitalization. Teresa felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. And Mr. Dawson agreed. Denise nodded sadly. He's scared, Teresa. Scared of doing the wrong thing, of making his son's situation worse. Dr. Maurice knows how to use that fear to his advantage. I understand, Teresa murmured, methodically folding a towel to hide her frustration. And what happened to Julian after we left the room? He went back to his previous state. He didn't pick up anything else, didn't react to the doctor's examinations. It's as if he had shut down again. Teresa nodded, thoughtful. It was no surprise. The safe environment had been interrupted, the connection broken. What are you going to do now? Denise asked. Continue my work, of course, Teresa replied with a small, sad smile. That's what I'm paid for. But as she said this, her mind was already working on an alternative plan. She couldn't just give up on Julian, not after what she had seen that morning. Throughout the rest of the day, Teresa carefully avoided the corridor leading to Julian's room, strictly following the doctor's recommendations. Roderick also seemed to avoid her, probably uncomfortable with the situation. In the late afternoon, as she was about to finish her shift, Teresa found Denise in the kitchen. Tomorrow is Saturday, the housekeeper commented. Mr. Dawson always works half a day at the office. Julian stays with the nanny. I see, Teresa replied, understanding the implicit message. Dr. Maurice called 3 times today, Denise continued. He's really pushing. He mentioned something about protocol conflict and risk of emotional interference. He seems very committed to this hospitalization, Teresa observed. Yes, the housekeeper agreed, lowering her voice even further. Almost as if it's personal, isn't it? The two women exchanged meaningful glances. There was something in the doctor's behavior that went beyond professional zeal. As she left the luxurious building on Fifth Avenue, Teresa made a decision. Instead of taking the bus home, she headed to a nearby internet cafe. She didn't have a computer at home, but she urgently needed some information. Over the next 2 hours, Teresa tirelessly researched the Horizon Clinic, Dr. Maurice Taylor, and cases similar to Julian's. What she discovered made her heart race. The clinic was, in fact, an institution of luxury and exclusivity, as the doctor always emphasized. What he didn't mention was that Dr. Maurice was not just one of the directors. He was the main shareholder and founder. Each hospitalization represented astronomical sums, especially for cases like Julian's, classified as elite intensive treatment. Even more disturbing, there were no public statistics on results. Teresa found several reports in parent forums mentioning prolonged stays that extended far beyond the initially contracted period, always with medical justifications for continuity of treatment. None of the described cases mentioned full discharge with complete recovery. There were vague references to partial improvements, continuous medication adjustments, and need for permanent follow-up. On a blog about psychiatric patient rights, Teresa found an anonymous post that explicitly mentioned Dr. Maurice and the Horizon Clinic, questioning the business model that seemed to prioritize prolonged hospitalizations over less invasive, more family-centered approaches. The post had been removed a few days after being published, but it was preserved in screenshots. Teresa printed all relevant materials and carefully stored them in her bag. She wasn't sure how she would use that information, but she felt she needed to be prepared. On Saturday, as Denise had informed, Roderick left early for the office. The nanny, a young nursing student named Camilla, was in charge of Julian. Teresa arrived at her usual time, determined to keep her distance from the boy, as per the orders received. She focused on cleaning areas away from his room, such as the kitchen and service area. Around noon, she heard the phone ring and Denise answer. Moments later, the housekeeper appeared in the laundry room, visibly disturbed. It was Dr. Maurice, she informed in a low voice. He called to speak with Mr. Dawson, but since he's not here, he left a message. He said he'll stop by tomorrow, Sunday, to psychologically prepare Julian for hospitalization. Teresa frowned. That's unusual, isn't it? A doctor making a home visit on a Sunday. Very unusual, Denise agreed, especially Dr. Maurice, who charges a fortune for every minute of his time. I think he's scared. Scared? Or of losing control over the case. Over Mr. Dawson, over Julian. The two women fell silent, absorbing the gravity of the situation. What had started as a genuine attempt to help a traumatized boy had turned into a power struggle. What do we do now? Denise asked, worried. Teresa took a deep breath before replying, We need help. We can't do this alone. That afternoon, after finishing her shift, Teresa didn't go home. Instead, she headed to the Nexus Tech offices, Roderick Dawson's company. She knew it was risky, that she could lose her job. But the urgency of the situation did not allow for hesitation. The modern corporate building was practically empty on Saturday afternoon, with the exception of security and a few dedicated employees, including the CEO himself. I need to speak with Mr. Roderick Dawson, Teresa told the receptionist on duty. It's a personal, urgent matter. Mr. Dawson does not receive unscheduled visits, the young woman replied, looking suspiciously at the simply dressed woman in front of her. Especially on weekends. Please, Teresa insisted. It's about his son, Julian. Tell him Teresa Oliver needs to speak with him for just 5 minutes. Something in Teresa's determination must have convinced the receptionist, who picked up the phone and made a brief internal call. After a few moments, she nodded and hung up. 18th floor, last door on the right, she informed, handing over a visitor's badge. He'll give you exactly 5 minutes. Roderick Dawson seemed surprised and slightly annoyed when Teresa entered his spacious office with a panoramic view of New York City. This is highly irregular. Ms. Oliver, he said, without getting up from his executive chair. I hope it's truly important. It's about your son, sir, Teresa replied, placing the documents she had printed on the table. And about Dr. Maurice Taylor. Roderick eyed the documents Teresa had placed on his desk with suspicion. His first impulse was to ask the employee to leave. He had enough problems to deal with without adding more drama to his life. However, the mention of Dr. Maurice's name piqued his curiosity. What is this? He asked, adjusting his glasses as he pulled the papers closer. Information about the Horizon Clinic and its founder, Dr. Maurice Taylor, Teresa replied, standing on the other side of the table. Information he didn't share with you. Roderick leafed through the documents with growing interest. Financial reports showed the clinic grossed millions annually, with significant profits. Anonymous family testimonies mentioned constant extensions of hospitalizations, always justified by clinical necessity. A diagram detailed the complex corporate structure linking Dr. Maurice to pharmaceutical companies supplying medication to the clinic. Where did you get this? He asked, his voice mixing astonishment and indignation. The internet, mostly, Teresa replied. Nothing secretive or illegal, just public information that's available to anyone who looks. The problem is that most families don't have the time or knowledge to investigate before making decisions under pressure. Roderick ran a hand over his face, absorbing the implications of those documents. Are you suggesting that Dr. Maurice has a financial interest in hospitalizing Julian? That all this insistence is motivated by money? I'm not making direct accusations, sir, Teresa replied cautiously. Just presenting facts that deserve consideration. Have you already paid significant advances for this hospitalization? Roderick nodded slowly. $200,000 up front, non-refundable, for specialized team reservation, plus $70,000 monthly during hospitalization, excluding medication and extra therapies. Teresa let the numbers speak for themselves. It was a fortune, even for someone as wealthy as Roderick Dawson. And there's one more thing, she added, pointing to one of the documents. I haven't found a single record of a case similar to Julian's that has been discharged from the Horizon Clinic with full recovery. Patients either remain hospitalized for increasingly long periods or leave with permanent medication regimens. A heavy silence fell over the office as Roderick absorbed that information. Outside, the sun began to set, casting golden shadows over the city's skyscrapers. "Why are you doing this, Teresa?" he finally asked, looking at her intensely. "Why do you care so much about my son?" The question caught her by surprise. Teresa took a deep breath before replying, "Because I've seen this before. In Miami, I worked with traumatized children who were diagnosed, medicated, and institutionalized when what they really needed was safety, predictability, and human connection." She paused. "And because I saw your son's eyes yesterday when he picked up that bottle of bubbles. It was real, sir. It wasn't coincidence or an automatic reflex. It was a choice, a connection." Roderick continued to study her, as if trying to decipher a complex enigma. "You're not just a cleaning employee, are you?" Teresa smiled slightly. "I am, yes, currently, but before in Miami I coordinated a shelter program for vulnerable children at the New Paths charity. When the organization lost funding during the economic crisis, I came to New York City to find any work I could. And you ended up cleaning luxury apartments on Fifth Avenue." "Life has its ironies," she agreed, without bitterness. "But perhaps it was fate putting me where I needed to be to meet Julian." Roderick turned his attention back to the documents, rereading some passages with a frown. "Dr. Maurice is coming to the house tomorrow," he commented almost to himself. "He said he needs to prepare Julian for hospitalization." "I know," Teresa replied. "Denise told me. It seems unusual, don't you think? Such a busy doctor making a house call on a Sunday." "He's nervous," Roderick concluded, understanding dawning in his eyes. He realized he lost control of the situation, even if momentarily. He saw that we got a reaction from Julian without his expensive protocols. Teresa nodded, satisfied to see the businessman reaching the same conclusions as she. "What do you intend to do, sir?" Roderick reflected for a few moments, tapping his fingers on the glass table. "I need to think. This is complex. If what you're showing is true, I've entrusted my son's health to someone with a blatant conflict of interest. On the other hand," he hesitated, "Dr. Maurice is respected. He has impressive credentials. What if he's right? What if postponing the hospitalization irreversibly harms Julian?" Teresa understood the anguish behind those words. The fear of making the wrong decision was paralyzing, especially when it came to a child's health. "Sir, may I suggest something?" "Go ahead. Seek a second opinion. Not another neurologist recommended by Dr. Maurice, but someone completely independent, with no connections to the Horizon Clinic. Someone specialized in child trauma, not just neurological issues." Roderick considered the suggestion. Tomorrow is Sunday. It would be impossible to find an available specialist on such short notice. Actually, Teresa hesitated briefly. "I know someone. Dr. Camilla Pratt, a pediatrician specializing in child trauma. We worked together in Miami. She now teaches at Columbia University and maintains a small clinic. I can guarantee her competence and, more importantly, her integrity. And would she see us on a Sunday? Fight for a child in need? Yes, especially if she knows the alternative is a potentially unnecessary hospitalization." Roderick was silent again, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he made a decision. "Contact this doctor. If she can see us tomorrow, we'll schedule it before Dr. Maurice's visit." He paused. "And Teresa, thank you for caring so much about my son." She nodded, feeling a weight lifted from her shoulders. "I'll make the contact immediately. Sir?" As she left the imposing Nexus Tech building, Teresa felt renewed hope. The conversation with Roderick had been more productive than she expected. The businessman was not the cold, distant man he appeared to be. He was just a desperate father, overwhelmed by fear and grief. That same night, Teresa managed to speak with Dr. Camilla Pratt. The pediatrician, after hearing the detailed account of the case, agreed to make a home visit the following morning. "I can't promise miracles, Teresa," the doctor warned over the phone, "but I can guarantee an honest evaluation without conflicts of interest." "That's all we're asking for," Teresa replied, relieved. On Sunday morning, Teresa arrived early at the Dawson apartment, accompanied by Dr. Camilla Pratt. The doctor was a middle-aged woman, with short gray hair and keen eyes behind modern glasses. She dressed simply but elegantly, without the ostentatious signs of wealth that characterized Dr. Maurice. Roderick received them at the door, visibly tired but determined. "Thank you for coming on a Sunday. Doctor," he said, extending his hand. "It's a pleasure to help," Camilla replied with a gentle smile. "Teresa told me about your son. I'd like to meet him if possible." "Of course." Julian is in the living room. The boy was sitting on the sofa as motionless as ever, looking into space. When the three adults entered, he showed no visible reaction. Dr. Camilla did not immediately try to examine him or ask questions. Instead, she sat at a respectful distance and simply observed for a few minutes. "Roderick, Teresa told me about the episode with the bubble bottle and the music," she finally commented. "Can we recreate that environment?" "Of course," the businessman replied, looking uncertainly at Teresa. "You know how?" "Yes, sir," she assured him, quickly heading to the stereo. In a few minutes, the room was filled with the soft melody of the lullaby composed by Helen. Teresa had brought a new bottle of bubbles and also some of the perfume she had discreetly retrieved from the locked room. This time, Roderick actively participated in the process, watching with fascination as Teresa blew bubbles that danced to the rhythm of the music. Dr. Camilla remained seated, observing not only Julian, but also the interaction among the others. Gradually, as had happened before, Julian began to show subtle signs of attention. His eyes followed the movement of the bubbles, his breathing synchronized with the rhythm of the music. "Keep going," Dr. Camilla encouraged in a soft voice. "It's working." Teresa approached the boy and gently offered him the bottle. As before, Julian looked at the object for several seconds. Then, to Roderick's visible emotion, he reached out and took it. "Incredible," the father murmured. His voice choked. Dr. Camilla observed everything with professional interest, making occasional notes in a small notebook. "Now let's try something new," she suggested after a few minutes. "Roderick, could you sit next to Julian?" The businessman obeyed, taking the seat next to his son on the sofa. He felt awkward, unsure how to act. "Just stay there," the doctor instructed. "Don't force anything. Just be a constant and calm presence." Over the next half hour, Dr. Camilla conducted a subtle evaluation based more on observation than on formal tests. She noticed how Julian reacted to different stimuli, how he maintained eye contact for increasingly longer periods, how his body visibly relaxed in the presence of the music and familiar aroma. "Roderick," the doctor finally said, "your son is not sick in the traditional sense. There's nothing broken in his brain that needs to be fixed with medication or hospitalization. But then why doesn't he speak? Why doesn't he move normally?" the father asked, confused. "Because he's trapped in a protective pattern," Dr. Camilla explained. "After the sudden trauma of losing his mother, his brain created a defense system, shutting down from the outside world that had become unpredictable and threatening. It's not an illness, it's an adaptive response." Teresa nodded, recognizing in medical terms what she had intuited from the beginning. "And how can we help him?" Roderick asked, leaning forward with renewed hope. "By doing exactly what you started here," the doctor replied, "creating an environment of safety, predictability and connection, gradually reintroducing familiar and comforting elements, allowing Julian to make choices, however small, and, above all, having patience." As they talked, the apartment doorbell rang. Denise appeared at the living room door. "Mr. Dawson, it's Dr. Maurice." A tense silence fell over the room. Roderick looked at Teresa and Dr. Camilla, undecided. "Let him in," he finally decided. Dr. Maurice Taylor entered the room with his usual confident demeanor, but stopped abruptly upon encountering the scene. Julian sitting on the sofa, holding a bottle of bubbles, music playing, an unknown doctor making notes, and Teresa, the employee he had forbidden from having contact with the boy, standing by the window. "What does this mean?" he asked, his face taking on an expression of professional indignation. Roderick stood up, facing the neurologist with new firmness in his gaze. "Dr. Maurice, allow me to introduce Dr. Camilla Pratt, a child trauma specialist. I requested a second opinion on Julian's case." The neurologist adjusted his glasses, visibly annoyed. "A second opinion? Without consulting me? We are less than 24 hours from hospitalization. All preparations have been made. The team is—" "Precisely because of that," Roderick interrupted. "Before making such an important decision, I wanted to be sure we were on the right path." Dr. Maurice cast a hostile glance at Teresa before turning his attention to the other doctor. "Dr. Pratt, I presume. Which institution do you come from? I'm a professor at Columbia University Medical School and maintain a private clinic specializing in child trauma, Camilla replied, with professional calm. I did my doctorate on the neurological effects of trauma in pre-adolescent children. Interesting, Dr. Maurice commented coldly. And you reached a conclusion about Julian's case in how long? An hour of observation? Long enough to notice that he responds positively to specific sensory stimuli in a safe and predictable environment, Camilla replied, undeterred. And to verify that he shows no neurological signs that justify intensive medication or institutional hospitalization. Dr. Maurice's face reddened. With all due respect, Doctor, I have been following this case for months. I have performed extensive examinations, consulted specialists, developed a specific protocol that coincidentally culminates in a very expensive hospitalization at the clinic of which you are the owner and majority shareholder, Roderick intervened, his voice calm but firm. The doctor visibly paled. Are you insinuating? I am not insinuating anything, Doctor. I am stating a fact. There is a clear conflict of interest that you never mentioned during our months of consultations. Dr. Camilla observed the scene with a neutral expression, while Teresa remained silent near the window. The only sound in the room was the soft music that continued to play on the stereo. Mr. Dawson, Dr. Maurice's tone was now conciliatory, almost paternal. I understand your anxiety. All parents in this situation seek alternatives, cling to any sign of improvement. But you must understand that isolated episodes like this, he pointed to Julian with the bubble bottle, do not constitute evidence of sustainable recovery. They are not isolated episodes, Roderick retorted. They are proof that my son is there, present, just waiting for us to create the right conditions for him to reconnect. Conditions created by a cleaning employee without medical qualification. The neurologist exploded, momentarily losing his composure. The room fell silent. Teresa maintained her dignity, meeting the doctor's gaze without backing down. It was then that something none of those present expected happened. No. The voice was small, almost a whisper, but perfectly audible in the silent room. All eyes turned to Julian. The boy still held the bubble bottle, but now he was looking directly at Dr. Maurice. Julian, Roderick called, incredulous. No, the boy repeated, his voice hoarse from disuse but firm. Teresa, good. Time seemed to freeze. Teresa brought her hand to her mouth, too emotional to speak. Roderick fell to his knees before his son, tears streaming freely down his face. Dr. Camilla smiled, like someone witnessing the confirmation of a long-held theory. Only Dr. Maurice remained impassive, his face a mask of disbelief and contained frustration. This is, he began, but was interrupted by Roderick. This is my son speaking. Doctor, the businessman declared without taking his eyes off Julian, after 6 months of silence. Without your clinic, without your medication, without your expensive protocols. Just with music, memory, and affection. The neurologist adjusted his tie, trying to regain his composure. An isolated reaction, possibly stimulated by the stress of the moment. It does not alter my clinical assessment that... Dr. Maurice, Roderick's voice was calm but carried unquestionable authority. I appreciate your services so far, but we will no longer require them. The hospitalization is cancelled. The doctor stiffened, his face a mask of controlled fury. You are making a grave mistake. Mr. Dawson, as the physician responsible for the case, I am obliged to formally record my objection to this imprudent decision, and I must warn you that, should Julian's condition worsen without proper treatment, there could be serious legal implications related to parental negligence and... Dr. Camilla interrupted, rising from her chair. As a colleague, I must remind you that threatening a parent with accusations of negligence for seeking legitimate medical alternatives borders on unethical intimidation, especially considering your obvious conflict of interest as the owner of the clinic to which you were referring the patient. Dr. Maurice cast a chilling look at his colleague. I will be in touch. Mr. Dawson, Dr. Maurice declared, collecting his leather briefcase with abrupt movements. I sincerely hope you will not come to regret this hasty decision. With these words, the neurologist left the apartment, leaving behind a silence charged with emotion. As soon as the door closed, Roderick turned all his attention to his son. "Julian," he called softly, still kneeling before the boy. "Are you really there, son?" The boy looked directly at his father, his eyes more focused and present than they had been in months. "Daddy," he whispered, his voice still hesitant from long disuse. It was enough for Roderick to break into tears again, pulling his son into a gentle embrace. Teresa and Dr. Camilla exchanged emotional glances, silent witnesses to a moment of healing that no examination or medication could provide. "What happens now?" Roderick asked after a few moments, turning to the two women without letting go of his son. Dr. Camilla approached and sat in the armchair next to the sofa. "Now comes the real process of recovery," she explained. "What we saw today is just the beginning, a first breakthrough of the barrier Julian built around himself. There will be advances and setbacks, good days and difficult days, but the fundamental thing is already happening: reconnection." "How can we help him?" Teresa asked, approaching timidly. "By creating predictable routines, gradually reintroducing elements of the life he had before, but without pressure or rigid expectations," the doctor replied. "Music, familiar aromas, stories, simple games. Everything that can build bridges between the past and the present, showing that it's safe to participate in the world again." Roderick nodded, absorbing every word. "And what about the medication Dr. Maurice prescribed?" "Should I continue? We will gradually reduce it under supervision," Dr. Camilla replied. "Some of the medications have sedative effects that may, in fact, be hindering emotional expression. But we should not stop abruptly." "I understand," Roderick said, still holding Julian against his chest. "And what about school? Friends? He's so isolated." "One step at a time," the doctor advised with a gentle smile. "First, we'll strengthen the foundation, the connection at home, the feeling of security. Then gradually we'll reintroduce the outside world." Teresa observed the interaction with a full heart. It was exactly what Julian needed: understanding, patience, an individualized approach, not rigid protocols or miraculous solutions. "Dr. Camilla," Roderick said after a moment of reflection, "would you agree to officially oversee Julian's case? As his primary physician," the pediatrician smiled. "It would be an honor, but with one condition." "Which one?" "That Teresa remains involved." She established an important connection with Julian, created a bond of trust that will be valuable in the recovery process. Roderick looked at Teresa with evident gratitude. "Teresa is not only welcome to remain involved," he declared. "If she accepts, I would like to hire her specifically to help with Julian, not as a cleaning employee, but as—" he hesitated, searching for the right word. "Caregiver," Teresa completed with a gentle smile. "It would be an honor, Mr. Dawson." The following weeks brought a gradual but constant transformation to the Fifth Avenue penthouse. Music returned to be part of the daily routine. The piano in Helen's room was tuned, and the door now remained open, allowing melodies to flow freely through the house. Teresa established a routine with Julian, based on predictability and choice. Each morning began with a ritual that honored Helen's memory: hot chocolate, music on the piano, now played by recordings or occasionally by a teacher who came twice a week to give Julian lessons, and the freedom to choose the day's activities. Roderick completely reorganized his professional agenda. He delegated several responsibilities at the company and began working remotely 3 days a week to be more present in his son's life. On the afternoons they spent together, they established new rituals. They cooked simple recipes, walked in Central Park near the apartment, built model airplanes, activities that allowed connection without the pressure of formal conversations. Dr. Camilla visited the family twice a week, monitoring Julian's progress with a keen eye and gentle guidance. As she had promised, she gradually reduced the medication until the boy was free from the sedative effects that had dulled his emotions for so long. "It's incredible how well he's responding," the doctor commented during a visit a month after the confrontation with Dr. Maurice. "His speech is more fluid every day. His engagement with the environment is visibly increasing." "The nightmares have also decreased," added Teresa, who now occupied a small room in the penthouse, officially hired as Julian's caregiver. "And he's starting to talk about his mother, not just with sadness, but recalling happy moments." Roderick nodded, emotional. Last night before bed, he asked me if he could keep a photo of Helen on his nightstand. He said that way he could say goodnight to Mummy before sleeping. This is healthy grief processing, Camilla explained. He's learning that he can maintain an emotional connection with his mother without it meaning being trapped in the pain of loss. Life began to gain a new normality. It wasn't the same as before, it never would be, but it was an existence with room for joy, for growth, for connection. Dr. Maurice, as he had promised, did not disappear completely. 2 weeks after the incident, Roderick received a formal notification questioning his decision to discontinue the recommended treatment. The letter, full of medical jargon and veiled threats, clearly aimed to intimidate. The response came not from Roderick, but from Dr. Camilla, a detailed report documenting Julian's progress under the new approach, accompanied by a formal letter reminding Dr. Maurice of the ethical implications of his undeclared conflict of interest and his attempt to intimidate vulnerable families. The message was clear. Future interferences would be treated not only as inappropriate, but potentially as violations of the medical code of ethics. The neurologist did not make contact again. 3 months after the day Julian spoke for the first time, the family celebrated an important milestone. The boys returned to school. Not full-time, just 2 mornings a week to start, with Teresa accompanying him as support. But it was a significant step in reconnecting with the outside world. "How was the first day?" Roderick asked anxiously when they picked him up. "Good," Julian replied with a small smile. "I made a new friend, Michael. He also likes airplanes." Teresa exchanged an emotional glance with Roderick. It was the first time Julian had spontaneously mentioned making a new friend since Helen's passing. That night, as Teresa tidied Julian's room, after he had fallen asleep, Roderick appeared at the door. "May I come in?" he asked softly. "Of course," she replied, folding the last pajamas into the drawer. "I wanted to thank you," he said, after a moment of silence. "Not just for what you did for Julian, but for opening my eyes, for reminding me that the most expensive or most technical solutions are not always the best." Teresa smiled, feeling the weight of those words. "Julian was there the whole time," she replied. "He just needed someone to see him beyond the diagnosis, beyond the problem to be solved." "You saw him as a person," Roderick agreed. "As a hurt child, not as a clinical case, and you taught me to do the same." A comfortable silence settled between them, filled only by Julian's soft breathing as he slept. "Teresa," Roderick hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "I know I hired you as Julian's caregiver, but the truth is you've become much more than that to us. To me." She felt her heart quicken, surprised by the turn of the conversation. "What are you trying to say?" "That you brought life back to this house. Not just for Julian, but for me, too. After Helen left, I thought I would never feel—" He made a vague gesture, searching for the right word. "Connection. With anyone. I closed myself off in the role of a desperate father, a busy executive, forgetting to simply be human." Teresa absorbed his words, recognizing the rare vulnerability in that habitually reserved man. "We all need connection," she replied softly. "It's what keeps us alive, what heals us when we're broken." "Yes," he agreed. "And that's why I wanted to ask—" He looked at his sleeping son before continuing. "When Julian is better, more stable, would you consider continuing to be part of our lives, but in a different way?" The question hung in the air, laden with unspoken possibilities. Teresa felt her face flush. "Roderick, she began, unsure how to respond. "You don't have to answer now," he hurried to say. "In fact, I shouldn't even be asking this yet. It's too soon for all of us. I just wanted you to know that when the time is right, the door is open. For something new, something we can build together, at our own pace." Teresa nodded, touched by his honesty. "Thank you for trusting me," she said, simply. In the weeks and months that followed, life continued to flourish in the Fifth Avenue penthouse. Julian gradually expanded his time at school, made new friends, returned to swimming, an activity he loved before his mother's loss. The apartment, once aseptic and silent like a museum, transformed into a true home. There were books scattered in the living room, science projects on the dining table, music constantly playing in the background. Helen's room remained open, not as an untouched sanctuary, but as a space of living memory, where Julian sometimes went to play a few notes on the piano or simply sit in his mother's favorite armchair. On a Sunday morning, 6 months after the day Julian first spoke, the family was gathered in the kitchen. Teresa and the boy were making pancakes, while Roderick set the table for breakfast. The domestic scene, so common in many families, was a small miracle for them, a testament to the power of human connection, patience, and understanding. "Daddy, look!" Julian exclaimed, lifting a perfectly golden pancake on the spatula. "I made it myself. It's perfect, son," Roderick praised with genuine pride. "Teresa taught me the secret," the boy confided in a conspiratorial tone. "It's to flip it when the little bubbles appear." The three laughed together, a sound that had become increasingly common in that house. Teresa watched father and son interact naturally, without the tension and fear that had once dominated their relationship. Julian spoke animatedly about the science project he would do at school, gesturing with enthusiasm. Roderick listened attentively, asking genuinely interested questions. As she placed the last pancake on the plate, Teresa felt a wave of gratitude. It hadn't been easy. There were still difficult days, moments when the pain of loss resurfaced, nights when Julian woke up crying, calling for his mother. But now these moments were faced together, with emotional honesty and mutual support. Dr. Camilla had once explained, "Healing does not mean absence of pain or forgetting. It means integrating loss into a new life. It means finding meaning even after the rupture." That was exactly what was happening in that family, Teresa thought. An integration, a reconstruction, a new way of being in the world after the storm. After breakfast, Julian asked for something surprising. "Can we go to Mummy's room? I want to show you something." Roderick and Teresa exchanged curious glances before accompanying the boy to what had been Helen's room. Julian went straight to the closet and, standing on tiptoes, reached for a small box on the top shelf. "Mummy showed me this once," he explained, holding the box with reverence. "She said it was for when we were ready." It was an old music box crafted from wood with delicate mother-of-pearl inlays. Julian opened it carefully, and a soft waltz began to play, the same Chopin melody that Helen used to play in the mornings. "She said that music was playing when you two met," Julian recounted, looking at his father. Roderick nodded, unable to speak, his eyes welling up. Teresa remained discreetly at the door, witnessing the sacred moment between father and son. "I think we're ready now, Daddy," Julian declared, with a wisdom that transcended his 8 years. "To keep Mommy here," he touched his chest, "but keep living." Roderick hugged his son tightly, letting the tears flow freely. They were not tears of pain alone, but of recognition, of transformation, of healing. Teresa watched the scene, her own heart overflowing. This was a family that had faced the most devastating storm and somehow found a way back to life. Not the same life as before that had been lost forever, but a new honest existence, where pain had room to exist alongside joy, where memory coexisted with the present, where love remained even after loss. It was a lesson Teresa would carry with her forever. Certain paralyses belong to the soul, not the body, and yield not before diagnoses or medications, but before constant presence, respect for uniqueness, patience to wait for each heart's necessary time. As the waltz continued to play softly, filling the room with its nostalgic and hopeful melody, Teresa felt that she was witnessing the closing of one cycle and the beginning of another. The family she had found broken was now rebuilding itself, not as a copy of what it had been before, but as something new, equally valuable, forged in pain but sustained by love. And as for her own role in this story, time would tell. For now it was enough to be present, to be a witness, to offer support when needed, and to step back when appropriate. The future would unfold at its own pace, like the music that now filled the apartment, no longer a lament for what was lost, but a celebration of what remains and what is yet to come. Life, like music, goes on, transformed by loss but still capable of beauty, still worthy of being lived, still full of possibilities. This was true healing, not the absence of scars, but the ability to dance even with them. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope Julian, Roderick, and Teresa's story has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey of stories that remind us of the power of human connection, we have prepared a special playlist with equally captivating narratives. Find it here by clicking on the left. If this story of healing and new beginnings moved you, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life and the transformative power of genuine care. Share your own experiences of healing and rebuilding in the comments. We look forward to hearing your stories too.